is Nichol Spohr for Simon Says Stamp with the April edition of Making the Cut. Making the Cut is my monthly series here at Simon Says Stamp where we talk about all things die cutting. If you enjoy die cutting, I highly suggest you like and subscribe. Now let's get to creating this darling Slimline Scene die cut card. I am combining dies from multiple places today for my card. So kind of the guts of my card, or what inspired this, is the new Simon Says Stamp Bear Hugs die. And I thought it would be fun to combine that with some die cut bumblebees and a hexagon background and a beehive. So I'm going to kind of share with you some tips and tricks along the way on how I came up with this and embellished everything. First, though, I am going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment for my card. This panel that I am stamping on is a little smaller than a slimline style card. So it's going to measure 8 1/4 by 3 1/4. And this is out of some, I believe this is Simon Says Stamp Cream Off cardstock. Yes, it is. It's one of my very, very favorites. So I've stamped and embossed Be Happy from the Be Happy Simon Says stamp set with clear embossing ink, and I'm heat embossing with gold embossing powder. I wanted this to be directly on my card base as there isn't a coordinating die for it, and by stamping it first, I'm not going to get embossing powder flakes anywhere on the panel. Next, I am going to take this background, and I decided it's not going to be completely covered with these little hexagons, so I'm going to splatter some gold paint all over this panel. I am using some of these starry colors here, and I put a little water in the pot of color I'm using. And I'm going to go ahead and use a small paintbrush to splatter this all over my panel. Just really pretty little gold splatters that add a lot to the overall design. They're going to kind of fill in those areas that don't have anything in the background without overwhelming the rest of the card. I'm doing this first so that there's plenty of time for the paint to air dry while I work on inking and assembling and embellishing the die cuts that go with this card. So I'm going to grab this and set it aside. Now the paint will dry really quickly. They are small splatters, and I have just found overall that this paint does dry very quickly. I hope maybe a little bit closer up you can see that a little bit better. Now I want to make sure and clean up my work surface before I get any further, so that I don't get any gold paint onto anything on my card or onto the other elements. I guess it is on my card. I'm using a microfiber cloth to just kind of buff and move that away as quickly as possible, because even in that short amount of time, some of those ink splatters have already dried. If they have, you can always take a little bit of water to help remove them. These are the cute layers for the Bear Hugs dies. So this is new from the All the Feels release, and I have die cut my bear from an assortment of cardstock. So this darkest color here is the Lawn Fawn Ground Coffee. And I am using a little bit of this PinkFresh Studio Licorice ink to ink up the edges. And one of the things I like the best about the Bear Hugs die, and any of these dies that Simon has done here, is that there's a backing piece, which makes the assembly so easy. I really like that from the most recent critter dies and things like that that they have come out with. It's the exact same size. It's not going to give you an outline or anything. And it makes it so that it's so simple to inlay all of these pieces. I have a few tips and tricks for building an inlay like this. Starting with, we're going to go ahead and inlay the tummy piece for the bigger bear first. This is out of some Lawn Fawn Vanilla Malt cardstock, and I'm inking up the edges with a little warm buff PinkFresh Studio ink. Then we'll add a little liquid glue behind this and inlay it. The die is one piece, meaning you can see it over here on the left of the screen. You're going to need to die cut it multiple times to get the different pieces for layering and inlaying and all of that good stuff. Don't discard the pieces you're not going to use. It's going to allow you to build up certain areas if you want to. My favorites are always like the nose area. For the bear, we can add multiple layers, and then the little bear that's in front of the larger one, I want him to pop out a little bit as well. So I'm actually going to take the dark ground coffee layer and inlay that in, and then we're going to layer this Lawn Fawn paper bag layer on top. That does mean we're going to need to layer multiple pieces for the nose as well, because I want that to stick out just a little bit. So anything that's not going to be on the forefront, I just save. I'm saved this little piece. It really doesn't matter a whole lot. I just use whatever leftover pieces there are. An embellishment wand, crystal katana, jewel picker, anything like that, tweezers even, are going to be super helpful when dealing with these small pieces. So you can see, because I'm not going to be using that dark piece for the nose on the bear, I've inlaid that piece in, and then I'm going to layer the lighter piece on top. But I also need to layer in a nose piece here. Oops, I put the wrong one in. I'm going to pop that out real quick with some tweezers, and then I need to find my lighter one and inlay that in. I knew I had one somewhere. I have a whole stack of extra pieces off camera. And that's going to allow me to build up the nose. Now we're going to add a little bit of this warm buff ink to both of the nose pieces. I am not doing a ton of extra inking, just a little bit on some of the edges of the bear and then the beehive. On the bumblebees, we're actually not going to be adding any inking. They're pretty small. Now we're going to layer on our light brown nose piece. I have another nose layer. We're basically just inlaying another layer in, and then we will finish with that dark ground coffee layer that I tried to put on in the first place. So that's a lot of layers on top, but we're actually using a lot of those leftover pieces that might get discarded otherwise, and I find it really helpful because I think it really gives a lot of depth and dimension without a lot of extra work. Now let's add our little baby bear here in front. This image would also be incredible for Mother's Day cards, I think, if you love to do a critter type of card. I always love critters, and whether they be stamps or die cuts, and I think this one is just so sweet. Then we're going to take that vanilla malt layer you can see on the screen and add that to our bear. And then I have a ground coffee nose also. It's teeny tiny on my screen. I did put it over on the white part of my Tim Holtz glass mat so I could find it easily. Just kind of move that into place. Now, the last thing I have to add for my bears is their eyes, which I'm going to die cut from black cardstock. They are teeny, teeny tiny. You can do some different things here. You could use some Nouveau Crystal drops in black if you want. You could color them in. I have done lots of different things. I would say, even though it's a little bit more work, probably my favorite is inlaying with the black cardstock. I'm using very little bit of glue and then just inlaying those eyes. If you want to add more depth and dimension after you've done this, you could always put some glossy accents on top. I did not today. Their eyes are pretty small. I'm going to add glossy accents to their noses and that's it. And I'm just kind of popping those little pieces you can see right out of the black die cut and then adding them to the design. Now the eyes for the small bear are so small, a little bit of glue came out around. I'm going to use my Spellbinders Tool-in-One, the piercing tip there, and just kind of remove that excess glue. It will dry clear. You wouldn't have to do this if you don't want to, but I did just kind of go ahead and go around because that little piercing tool tip is good for so many things. I use my Tool-in-One on every single card I make. Now there are several die cut honey pots out there, but I grabbed this one from, or beehives. I'm using a honey pot, but I'm going to make it into a beehive. I should clarify a little bit. This is the Hero Arts Honey Pot Fancy Die. I love it. It was handy. I grabbed it. There's also a great building, like build set, die set from Honeybee Stamps that would be great. And I started to put warm buff on this. This is die cut from Lawn Fawn Gold Rush cardstock. You guys, I love this cardstock. It's kind of goldish with gold flecks in it and it's beautiful. I ended up inking up the edges with some PinkFresh Studio ink in Marigold and I like that much, much better. Now I'm going to take my bee die cut and my honey pot and I'm not actually adhering them. I want to stamp some bee trails from the Bee Happy stamp set. I think they're going to add a lot to the overall card. So I'm kind of playing around with placement, trying to figure out where I want these to go. I'm going to stamp them with this PinkFresh Studio Licorice ink. It is a black ink, but I do want to tell you that I think it's a dye ink, and as it dries, I think it dries to a really dark, dark gray. So it's a little softer than black, which is what I wanted for my card. If you are looking for an ink like that, I love it. I actually very much love all the PinkFresh inks and highly recommend them. They are beautiful. Now I was going to attach the honey pot and I took a little breather and I put adhesive on the back and everything and I thought, I'm just going to wait a second. Let's go ahead and add our hexagons first. Now the hexagon element's fun. You could use it with this outline piece if you want or not. And I actually ended up deciding not to. I think it's going to give a little bit softer background and not be so prominent and draw your eye in quite so much. It's just more of a supporting cast, if you will. So I've die cut the hexagon element from Lawn Fawn Gold Rush cardstock, Hero Hues Mustard cardstock, Lawn Fawn Vanilla Malt cardstock, and Lawn Fawn Sunflower cardstock. I wanted an assortment of hexagons. The vanilla malt's going to be very, very soft against the cream off background, but you can still see it. I'm using that hexagon element though as a guide. It's going to allow me to build whatever kind of hexagon background I want. I am simply placing it on my background, adding a dot of glue in the middle, and then I'm using my embellishment wand to pick up the hexagon I want and put it in place. This allows me to build around the sentiment and not cover it, to fill in more area where I think it's needed. I built that hexagon from coming up from the bottom left corner up towards the top. I built that up a little bit higher than what the shape actually is. I'm going to build some down here at the bottom. And something fun that I realized is if you line up a hexagon with a previously adhered hexagon, you're going to have everything lined up perfectly, meaning I'm not going to have a scattering all over. That was kind of important to me down here at the bottom, so things lined up. I did not worry about it up at the top. I don't think it's going to be as noticeable if it's further away. So I didn't worry about trying to, you know, line it up with a previously adhered hexagon. So I lined that up and I'm adding a few more little dots here. I tried really hard not to adhere anything back behind where the bear is going to be. If it's not going to show up, I'm not going to worry about it. I did want like some peeking out from behind though, so that's kind of what I was doing here. And I kept using my bear as a reference as well as the beehive. I lined up again with another hexagon. Add a couple more here and there. I liked the little pops of color and neutral color in the background of this card. Anything that could help reinforce and tell the story of this scene. And the slimline style was especially great for this card as it gave me that room to fill in all of the areas, to add the beehive, which is a pretty substantial piece, to add the bears, which again is a pretty big piece, and then add in some little bumblebees, but without overwhelming and kind of squishing it all together. I'm really loving that slimline is an option now and kind of allows for some different creativity as far as more space. Once the glue has dried, I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess hexagons off of my panel. I love how this looks. I can save all those extra hexagons and the frames for another project because there are quite a few left over. I am then going to adhere my Bear Hugs image with foam adhesive down here along the bottom of the panel. I think it's going to lay a lot nicer against the hexagons die cuts in the background, and so I'm going to do that for my beehive up at the top as well. I want to trim away the top of this since it's a honey pot and not exactly a beehive, so it looks more like a beehive, and that makes it work perfectly. Now we're ready to create some bumblebees. These bumblebees are layering dies from the Lawn Fawn Portrait Meadow backdrop, and they are so cute. So what I'm going to do is I have a backing piece out of the Lawn Fawn Sunflower cardstock, and then I had originally die cut the outline for my bumblebees from the Black Licorice cardstock, and it was just a little too dark, I think. I don't know, it just was a little harsh. I decided I didn't like that as well. So we're going to use Lawn Fawn Storm Cloud cardstock instead, which is a really pretty dark gray. And then the wings are probably my favorite part. They are die cut from Lawn Fawn Pearlescent cardstock, or yeah, vellum. I said cardstock, I meant vellum. Pearlescent vellum. So they've got this really pretty shimmery sheen to them that I think is perfect for wings. I'm going to assemble these guys, and then what is nice is I had die cut all of those bumblebees from black cardstock. I thought I would just cover the eyes maybe with a black pen or Nuvo ebony, you know, little dots, anything like that. I couldn't really decide what I wanted to do there, but I had those leftover black die cut, so I'm actually going to layer on the eyes on top of all of my gray bumblebees so that they have black eyes that stand out from the face here on the little bumblebees. And I've got 3 of them. Now, originally I just stamped the one bumblebee trail, and that's because that was the only one that I knew for sure where it was going to go mostly. And then I knew the others might potentially, depending on where they end up, have to be stamped over a hexagon or 2. So I waited, and I am going to stamp the bumblebee trails, and you'll see that here in a minute. I went ahead and added the glossy accents to the noses on my bear. I still have a few things to do before I need to stamp my bumblebee trails, and so I think that will dry before I get to that point. In addition to my Be Happy, you could really build this into any kind of sentiment, but this is also from the Be Happy stamp set. So I could you know, be happy, things will get better. Be happy, it's your birthday. Be happy, how old are you? There's all kinds of different sentiments in here, but I opted to use it's your birthday. There is a happy birthday as well. There's hey there, be happy. You could turn this into a lot of things. I turned it into a birthday card, but that's really the only thing about this card that's going to say it is a birthday card. So I just stamped those remaining 2 bumblebee trails. I was just kind of trying to plan out where to put my bees depending on where my sentiment strip was going to go, and I will add that in a minute. I'm using the piercing tool from my Spellbinders Tool-in-One to poke the eyes through the black outline right on to my bumblebee. And look at their little faces. Aren't they just so sweet? I love how these turned out. I did do another layer of glossy accents on my bear's nose to give it a little bit more prominence. We're also going to add a scattering of hearts. These are awesome Trinity Stamps coffee bean hearts, and the color works so beautifully with this card design. I love the neutral, and then I love the addition of little hearts in the center of some of the hexagons. We're even going to take, though, a little red heart and add it to the chest of our baby bear for a little pop of color. I'm using my embellishment wand to just easily pick those up and pop them in place in the center of my hexagons. Adding that little red heart there. I think we'll add just a couple more of our little brown coffee bean hearts. And then we want to stamp the It's Your Birthday sentiment on the sunflower cardstock. So I'm grabbing that scrap of sunflower cardstock. And we're going to stamp and emboss this with white embossing powder. I like how the white looks against the yellow, and it really complements and coordinates the card design. So it blends in just like the gold embossed Be Happy does, and doesn't overwhelm, like it's not a harsh black or something like that. Then I'm going to use my favorite Sentiment Labels dies to die cut this into a thin little strip that I can then pop up right underneath the Be Happy sentiment using some foam adhesive. I always make sure my heat tool is really well heated up before bringing it to the cardstock to help reduce warping. You can see there was no warping on this piece at all. These little foam adhesive strips, I always keep all the extra little pieces. I piece them together to make one strip here on my card today, or on this strip today. I'll use every little bit and piece of these foam adhesive strips because they're my absolute favorite. And we're just going to line that right up underneath Be Happy. And then we're going to go ahead and trim a piece of sunflower cardstock to 3.5 by 8.5 inches. That is a Slimline card size. We're using a Slimline card base. You can also use some dies if you have them. Hero Arts has some fantastic Slimline dies that come in all the sizes, so you could really create some nice mats. Simon Says Stamp has some Slimline dies as well. If you don't want to trim it out, and I placed my background down and then my panel that we have with the cute little scene. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this Slimline die cut scene card, part of the April 2021 Simon Says Stamp Making the Cut series. Please be sure to visit the Simon Says Stamp blog for more information. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time.